So welcome to Thursdays with Franco, as I said, without Franco today. So this is Stuart and Darren in the Sydney office. And today we do have a special guest. We've got Steve Lawton from our Melbourne office. We've managed to grab him before he whizzes off back to the UK to enjoy their sunshine we're not having a lot of here right now. So Steve's going to talk to us about an AI service that we can use to help get data into our databases, and we can run some nice analytics and that sort of thing. So he's going to talk to us about that. But before we kickstart, Darren.
Thank you. Yeah, welcome all. Good to see everybody on the call this morning. And yeah, it's just still a wet and miserable and rainy Sydney, but been very nice to be back in the office. So a regular on this call is Jason Lowe. The reason he's not here today because he's really busy setting up for a upcoming hackathon that's going to be run over this weekend. I'm just going to share my screen just with a link to that, just so everyone can see. So what we're doing from an Oracle perspective, we are sponsors of the United Nations World Innovation Day Hackathon. As you can see from that countdown, starting tomorrow. And at the moment, top there, you can see just over 2,000 participants worldwide have joined into that environment. So yeah, it'd be great if anybody on this call can actually join in. You can sign up, you can start your own team. Once you joined, you can actually join to other teams if you want to be able to go. And it's all around being able to try and get some sustainability and development goals for the good of the world and the rest of our compatriots out there. We'll be hosting and working on the Tech for Good channel. So we'll have mentors there to be able to help you. And one of the things, where we've been covering a lot of the Apex content in this call, it'd be great if we could have some teams actually using Oracle Application Express to further those goals around sustainability and development for the emerging world.
Can I just add that we quite often talk about hackathons and the sort of skills that we need, and a lot of people think that we just need hands-on keyboard. It really is about any skills. Anyone who's got an interest in sustainability goals that the United Nations have set out, anyone who wants to help get involved, mentor from business skills through to presentation skills and hands-on keyboard skills, but they're not the only skills we need. So, anyone who's got an interest in that space should really get involved. It's a great cause.
Fantastic. Yep. So it'd be good to see someone there, and maybe next week, anybody who's on can actually give us a bit of feedback.
That's great.
Can't wait. Right. We did say we've got a guest today. So 2 weeks
special
ago,
guest.
a special guest, absolutely.
Very special.
So 2 weeks ago, I covered some of the analytics content. Steve Lawton is a colleague of mine. I'm Sydney-based, he's Melbourne-based, but we cover sort of the same products from an analytics perspective. Steve has started to dabble with a lot more of our machine learning AI capability that we embed into the platform. So a lot of that in the actual database tier itself. So the whole messaging is to sort of bring the data, the algorithms to the data rather than pulling it out, going off and then pushing it back to be able to do some analysis. I'm going to hand over to Steve to talk to us around what we now call AI vision.
Thanks, Darren. So what I will do, I will
Have you got
basically have a demonstration today where I'll talk a little bit about AI vision, what that is, how that fits into some of the wider services that Oracle are offering on OCI. And then I'll talk a little bit about and demonstrate a particular example of where we can automate this process to go from a sort of an end-to-end, having documents and automatically extract the key information from those documents and then provide that into a structured format into an autonomous database, which you can then, once it's then in that structured format, you can then do something with it, whether that's reconcile against other systems or, whether it could be approval forms and understand whether you the data is as they say. So what I'll do is I'll just share my screen. Okay.
Yep, we can see that.
See all of that. Okay, so I've just got 2 or 3 slides to start with, just so we're all clear about where these services sit in the Oracle sort of data and analytics space.
We can
The-
see your whole screen, just saying, just your entire.
Yes,
desktop.
because I've got a yeah, I know that because I've got a command line.
I just didn't want you to put anything up on the side that we don't want to
No,
see.
it's all. Don't worry, it's all, all fine. Yeah, the obligatory safe harbor statements. This is all for information purposes only. And so when we talk about Oracle AI, it's a broad church, but essentially what we talk about at the lower level there, at the bottom rung, we have things like, and Darren mentioned it then, the Oracle machine learning, OML, which is essentially the in-database processing, right? So if you have your data sitting in the database, rather than pull the data out in order to then do some machine learning or some processing of that data, you actually leave the data where it resides and you do the processing there, and you build your machine learning models in the database. So that's an offering we've had for a long time. It's certainly been rapidly changing over the last few years with things like Python APIs available and so on, but that's been a sort of stalwart of the Oracle offering around the database. And of course, now with the ADW, it's essentially part of the ADW subscription license, whereas in the old days it was an add-on that you had to pay extra for. So that's an offering. The one on the left, OCI Data Science, is really aimed at Python developers who are data scientists. So that involves things like Jupyter notebooks, developing models using Python packages, broad availability of Python packages to develop and deploy machine learning models. And then the OCI data labeling service is really about when you want to customize one of the AI services I'll talk about now. You can label your images with certain extra information and use that to train a custom model. So they're the sort of the lower level services. Then on top of that, now we've developed over the last probably 12 and maybe 18 months, these collection of, you can think of them as like black box offerings. So they do certain industry standard offerings around machine learning, and you don't have to build anything yourself. You don't build the model, it's already built for you. So we have offerings around digital assistant. We have offerings around the OCI language service, which is really around things like, think of it like text analysis, things like language recognition, sentiment analysis is involved with that. We have OCI speech, which is speech to text. OCI vision, I'll talk about in a second. And we have things like OCI anomaly detection, which can do things like anomaly detection. And then we have OCI forecasting as well, which is really self-explanatory. These offerings are essentially pre-built for you. You essentially just send your data to the service, and the service will return with some prediction and some outcome for you. Okay, and the one we're going to focus on this morning is OCI Vision service.
So Steve, you don't need to actually do any setup. They just standard functions you just subscribe to in the OCI.
Yep, yeah, I'll show that in a second. They're all available already in, so they aren't something you instantiate or you have to start or stop. They're essentially, think of them like a SaaS service. They're just there and they're just available. You push your data to it and it will give you an answer or an outcome or a prediction of some description. So and the way they work in terms of the payments and so on is again, it's only as you use. So if you pass it a document and it tells you all the text within that document, then that's one transaction, and you pay per transaction essentially for most of these things. So the vision service is really, it's about these, as I say, having these pre-trained managed models that you don't have to deal with. They're based on, best in class Oracle research, and the models are available for you to use. And particularly for the vision service, essentially, think of that like image recognition, object detection within an image, and then the other side of that is the document analysis as well. So being able to pull out and extract text. So think of it as we might know it as OCR, optical character recognition. It's those aspects that encompass the OCR vision service. So the two main aspects of that are on the left is the image analysis. So that does things like object detection. So if you have an image of, say, a street with cars and people on it, it will detect the number of people. It will detect the number of cars. It will even detect, elements of a car. It will read the number plate, and it will provide the information back to you for that. But we're going to focus on the right-hand side this morning. So the document AI aspect. So this is all around the passing documents. So it can be PDFs, it can be handwritten notes, rotated documents. They're upside down, they're 90 degrees. Business forms, PDFs, receipts, invoices, all those sorts of information where obviously they're in a document. There's not a lot you can do with them. And what the service provides is you pass the document to it, and it will scan and analyze the document, and it will pull out the key value information around that and all the different text within that. Okay, and then the idea of that is then you can then use that as part of the business process to do something further with it once you have that data then in that structured format.
So Steve, is that a picture of your car?
I'm only a lowly solution engineer, Darren.
Very clean. He'd be red if it was his.
Yeah, true.
That's right. So what we'll do is that's really in terms of the slides. I'll show you a little bit around what that looks like in a manual sense here in OCI, and how to find them, and you can have a play with them yourself. And then there's obviously the more practical aspect then of how do you automate that process to get an outcome, because if I will show you now one or two documents and what it looks like and what the results are, but obviously in reality an organization would have hundreds or thousands of documents. You can't be going in manually uploading them yourself, so that you would need to provide some automation to do that. And in my case, I have some Python code I've developed that does that, so I'll illustrate that in a moment. So if you go to in your OCI, within analytics and AI, you can see on the right here, we have the AI services. So things like language, forecasting, speech, as I spoke about earlier. And then we have vision. So we click on vision. Again, that's broken down into the different categories. So, image classification, which categorizes scenes based on features in the image. Object detection, so locates and identifies different objects in an image. And then the document AI, which is really around, as it mentions here, things like OCR, key value pair extraction. Okay.
Steve, just in the tradition of a good Franco demo, can you make it a bit bigger, please, for the people like me in the audience?
Sure.
Thank you, mate. There we go.
For the middle-aged people with funny eyesight.
The youngsters, for the youngsters.
Okay, so what it's done is so it automatically has a couple of images built in here. So that's the first one that we've just looked at. And as you can see here, it's a receipt. It tells me it's a receipt because it says so here. So it's already worked out the type of document it is. If you actually click on that, you can see there's a whole host of different ones. It's going to check and work out what it thinks it is. And that's based on a probability. You can see the way it's highlighted these fields here. It illustrates that it can pull out all the different lines from that invoice or the individual words. But really the main thing from a practical perspective is this key value information. So pre-built within, in this case, a receipt, the model understands that it's going to pull out some key information already, wherever that may lay on the layout of the receipt. It's going to pull out things like the merchant name, the address, the phone number, the transaction time, the date, the subtotal, the total, and then it's also going to pull out all the line item information, right? So you can see here, someone's had an Americano, $3.19, and a water for $4.60, right? So wherever that is in the document, whatever the location, it will work that out and it will present that back to you. Okay. So that's key. This key value information to me is the crux of it, because you can have this raw text, but what are you going to do with it? It's a bit tricky to know which, what makes sense and what it is, right? So this is how that works in terms of essentially the key value information. But obviously at the moment, I'm just, you can drop a file in here and upload one, but I'm doing this manually, which is good for just demonstration purposes here. But in practice, it's not very useful because you would need to automate this as part of a process. So that's what I've done here, okay? So what I have is I've written a Python script that loops through an object storage bucket with images in. It parses them all, returns the response. I then pass that through, and then I load that into an ADW, okay? Now, once that's in a table, then obviously that can be part of an ongoing process, okay? So if we look at my bucket here, this AI Vision input one, I have 4 images, okay? Now, because there are invoices and receipts, I have to find something that, there's no real personal identifiable information in. So a few of these are actual receipts from myself, like a Telstra bill and an old plumbing bill when we had a broken toilet. So I've just got those in here, 4 of them. There's PDFs, JPEGs, and PNGs. So if we look at, say, a little report I've built, just a simple report to illustrate that there's no smoke and mirrors here, it's actually working. So if I refresh this document, this report, the OAC report, you can see there's no data in here, right? Because there's no data coming from the table. Now, if we look
You're planning to take those images from Object Store, you're going to parse them through using Python,
yes,
and then you're going to dump it in the database and then use Analytics Cloud to just have a look at.
Just have a look at them. That's right. So it's essentially a connection to my ADW database, right?
And before we share everyone with Python, we'll come back to the Python a little bit at the moment, because obviously when we talk about low code and things like that, that might be a bit scary for people having to write Python. But
there's a few options we can talk about around that. So here's some sample invoices. This is an actual, I've taken my name and address off the top, but this is an actual invoice of a broken toilet a couple of years ago, I think it was. Here's an example. So what's going to happen on the right-hand side once you run this process is this will be populated with the relevant information it's extracted, all in a nice table, so you can then compare. This is an old Telstra broadband invoice of mine from a few years ago. I've changed my address there. And then this is from a couple of weeks ago. If anyone knows Melbourne, there's Imperial Hotel is a good place to go and watch the soccer. So I was there watching Liverpool beat Manchester City, I'd like to just point out. And that's a look at the extortion it costs you of the beer. $16 for a pint.
It's outrageous.
Been here a long time, but it still amazes me how expensive it is. And in the spirit of beer, this is just a Google one I found, right? This is from Washington. So someone's had a couple of Coronas, and I think carne asada is a food, I think. So just as an illustration, right? So the other 3 are invoices, and this is a receipt, okay? So it'll automatically work that out for us, okay? So at the moment, as I say, there's nothing here. So what we'll do is, here's my command line here. So notice it just says Python and then the name of my Python file. I'll run that. And that will basically then, it's going to loop through my list of 4 files. And it's going to then send them off to the AI Vision service, return the results. I'm going to then parse it and then load that into the ADW. So essentially, it looks like this while that's running. So there's, it could be an existing workflow, for example. The documents are uploaded to Oracle Cloud. There's a number of options you can have to call the service. So mine is simply just a Python script on my laptop. You can do other fancy, more event-driven processes like using OCI functions. So essentially, I could convert my Python script into a function in OCI, and that would be event-driven and serverless, and that would also work very well. Then it's processing it, extracting the key value information and loading into ADW. And then that could be part of the business, or I could just as a stream of data pass it into an API or something further on for processing. So what we're doing here now, we're just going to sort of stop there and analyze the data. You can see it's ran through those 4 files. It's telling you that there's an invoice, a receipt, and then a couple of other invoices, right? So it's done. So if I go back in here and I refresh this, again, it's just a very simple one to illustrate. Okay, so it's saying I've got 4 documents. These are my document types, and this is when it ran, which is 11:22 this morning. So I've just built a very simple little, actually I meant to show you, a very simple little a couple of tables, a little data model to store this data in my ADW, right? So to get it from that unstructured to the structured. So here we have header information. So all that information so this is for an invoice. So things like the customer details, the vendor, the ABN number, when the invoice is due, the invoice ID, the invoice date. This is all that key value information that AI Vision is providing. For receipts, it's slightly different as merchant information. And then the line items, so the individual line items. This is sort of has to be a separate one because it's one to many. We'll bore you with that.
Steve, ABN, that's pretty Australian specific. It was able to pick that up, or?
It's a good question. So I've done a few little things to pull up ABN, and it's in the roadmap, but there is a roadmap item where you can formally append additional key value information that you would like, which is for your sort of local data. So for example, it could be like, say, a tax file number, for example, you want to pull out. That would be unique to Australia. So that would be something you can add in later. Yeah, but at the moment, I've essentially parsed it. I've used a bit of fancy code to do that, to be honest. Yeah. So if we look now at the individual items, the results, we can see, okay, so here's my plumbing invoice. It's picked up the vendor name, Oakley, Victoria, the further information here about the vendor, the ABN number it's picked up, the invoice ID here, it's picked up nicely, the invoice date, and the invoice total $748. Again, a lot of money for a fixed toilet. So I seem to be veering into a cost of living rant on this thing. Subtotal and the tax, right? So that's picked up that quite nicely. And then the line items, so concealed system, completed service and repair, that's mentioned there, and the dollar value, and then the basin mixer inspection, $100 as well, right? So that's picked that up nicely. The Telstra one, we'll have a quick look at. So it's got my name here, it's picked up there, it's got my fake address here, I changed. It's got the ABN invoice number, invoice date amount, 7240. And the line items, it's sort of picked up from here. And then the one from the Imperial, it's picked up the vendor name, the address. So it's, it does work pretty well. And then it's for the line items, it's picked up the individual ones there.
And Steve, you said, if you scan those upside down or.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I've tried. Yeah, 180 degrees, 90, doesn't matter. It's a work. Now, if you look at this one, which would be a tip, it's sort of got creases in it. There's a bit of table behind and so on. But it, again, works very well. It picks up the merchant name. So this is a receipt as opposed to a, so notice the fields are slightly different. The number, the transaction time and date, the subtotal, the total, and the tax. And then it's nicely picked up the 3 line items, right? 2 Coronas and I'm not sure what that is, but it's food, I would guess. $9, right? So, it works pretty well. And so essentially the end result here, which is the end of my little talk here, is that you've gone from having data here, which is fairly useless, to being able to push that through into extract it and push it through into a structured format, which in my case is into an autonomous database, which can then be used to do other things like reconciliations or part of an ongoing business process.
Nice.
Okay.
So we've spent, the last few weeks, we've addressed a few times accessing things like structured data. We've looked at JSON, which is kind of semi-structured in that respect. And then we've looked at unstructured data. These are all different ways for us to get data into a database, for us to be able to do some of the analytics. I think if Franco and I had have built this demo, we'd have used Apex as the front end because that's the kind of guys we are. You know, we're a bit Apexy. I like the fact we've gone straight for analytics there. You know, the idea of using an API-driven service like the AI means there's lots of different ways to access that. So, you know, I know you talked about functions and you talked about Python. You know, those things can be a bit scary. But we know that because they're API-driven, technically we could quite easily throw some of the API functionality into something like Apex or our ERP systems. You know, these are I always say these are quite dull transactions because they're sort of, you know, boring orders and that sort of thing. But that is the reality of what we're up against, right?
It is. I mean, the things like the image detection is a bit fancy. Oh, look, it can read a number plate. But the reality is in our line of work, it's probably not as relevant as an OCR type situation like this, where you know, everyone has invoices and documents and purchase orders and so on, and there's many reasons why you want to pull out the text, right? So I think it's more relevant, this OCR type use case.
So Steve, you built this demo for a couple of organizations that are trying out some of these. Can you tell us what you're doing?
Yeah, so one of them, one of the organizations, so again, I think this is a really good use case, is they have a procurement system, and so if you want to purchase items internally from a procurement system, you have to go through the procurement process, right? There's a master catalog of information there. You say, I want to, buy this, and that goes through. But what's happening in this organization is no one's really using it. They're all just going off, buying the stuff directly, and having invoices directly with the vendor, the end vendor, right? So they're not going through the procurement process. So correspondingly, they're not sure, the organization's not sure whether why are they doing that? Why aren't they going, is it because it wasn't in the master catalog and procurement? And even if it was, we wanted to see what these items are so that we can maybe or have a negotiation with these vendors and get them on the list and get preferential rates, right? So the use case was essentially around, they get so many invoices coming through, they can't check them all manually to say, well, why is this person or this group have all these invoices? There's so many of them that they just don't have the manpower to someone sit there scanning all these individual invoices. So the idea is to essentially take these invoices, use AI Vision Service to pass them through exactly like I've just shown you there with this OCR functionality with something like a Python script we've built there. And then essentially use that information to then reconcile it against the procurement master catalog list of products and understand, well, was the product, could they have bought it in our system initially, or could they not? And if they couldn't, okay, how much is it? Is it, how they can start doing counts of the data, standard database stuff, right? And be able to understand the amounts and the text within it, and whether these items they should be looking at going back to the vendors and getting them on their procurement list. So that's a very good use case in that regard. And another one was to do with basically having people send in approval or forms with an application form essentially, and attaching a document with evidence that they've done what they've said they will on that document. And so again, because of the large volume, they can only pick and choose a few sample items rather than be able to in bulk scan through the application form. It says we bought X and Y. Does the invoice actually show they've bought X and Y? The organization was talking about, well, actually, some instances, some people just upload a picture of their cat because they know no one's really going to check, right? So the idea is that they can then reconcile the application form and what they've said they're going to do with the invoice and what they've actually done, and then being able to say, well, actually, we're going to approve that, we're going to reject it, or we're going to park it and have someone manually review it. So there's a lot of use cases in that particular area that I think this is a good fit for.
Yes. So yeah, of interest, you talked about that. Those are very much around the OCR side. I know we're building in integration between these AI services and Oracle Analytics, and I've seen some internal little proof of concepts. One of them was quite interesting. Was it was actually a parking lot and taking a picture every 15 minutes. And then we'd go through and we'd actually analyze, and you can actually look at utilization, because it'll pick up, we've got so many cars, so many motorbikes, when are the peak periods, when are times when the car park's a lot fuller. So
so councils will be interested in that, right?
Yeah. So parking, maybe charge a premium for those periods of time where we've got too many cars in the car park. So that's more sort of the other side of it, rather than just.
So you're saying that are you saying that there's an update at some point to an integration there with Oracle Analytics Cloud?
Yeah, that's a nice public roadmap being published. So that was an internal little demo I've seen, but certainly sometime this year we'll see that functionality coming out as a direct integration as well.